In limited magic, a bomb is a good thing and refers to a card that is so powerful that it drastically alters the game in your favor, even allowing you to come back from behind. In other words, these are the Duskmourn House of Horror cards you most want to open as your Pack 1 Pick 1 in Draft, or in your sealed decks at the pre-release. This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. If you want to pre-order some Duskmourn cards, use my link in the description. If you're interested in my thoughts on more than just the strongest cards in the set, then you should check out my set review where I gave my thoughts on every single card you can get in Play Boosters. Alright, without further ado, here are my picks for the 10 strongest cards in Duskmourn. At number 10, I've got Tyvar the Pummeler. A large portion of Tyvar's power comes from the fact that he's incredibly difficult to kill. As long as you have another untapped creature in play, you can tap that creature and have Tyvar become indestructible until end of turn. This makes him great as an attacker and great as a blocker, and this is also a format where the survival mechanic means you can actually get extra value out of tapping your other creatures too, so it might not just be a cost, it may also be something that benefits you. But if that's where Tyvar ended, he probably wouldn't quite have made the list, but then he's got an amazing activated ability that buffs your entire board, and it only costs 5 mana. Oftentimes, if you play Tyvar on turn 3, something else on turn 4, and then attack with both of them on turn 5, it's pretty much going to be game over, because Tyvar can offer at least +3/+3 to your entire board, and that's a big enough stats boost to find lethal out of nowhere, and to make combat impossible for your opponent. At number 9, I have the Swarm Weaver. This card is just really good on rate because you pay 4 mana and you get a 2/3 and 2 1/1 flying creature tokens. That would already make for an incredibly strong card, but you know that because it's on this list, it also does something else. And it certainly does. It has Delirium. This means if you have 4 or more card types among cards in your graveyard, you get a bonus. And in this case, all of your insects and spiders get +1/+1 and have Death Touch. This includes the 2 tokens you make with it. So there are going to be times, especially by the mid to late game, where you play this and you pay 4 mana for a 2/3 and 2/2/2 flyers, which is insane. And there are other insects and spiders in this set. In fact, quite a few of them, so it's going to be buffing some of your other creatures too. At number 8, I have Ghostly Dancers. So its stat line isn't the most impressive as a 5 mana 2/5 flyer, but it has a whole lot going on in the text box. It has an Enters trigger that lets you return an enchantment card from your graveyard to your hand, or you can use it to unlock a locked door of a room you control. Either way, you're getting some really nice value just by having this card enter the battlefield. But what really pushes it into bomb status is its Eerie trigger, which means you get something whenever an enchantment you control enters and whenever you fully unlock a room, and it's a big one, you get a 3/1 white spirit creature token with flying. That's the kind of flying body that is relevant virtually all game long, and this can churn them out quite easily, especially in white, which is an enchantment-heavy color, especially if you're pairing it with blue. The most absurd thing you can do with Ghostly Dancers is play it, use its Enters trigger to fully unlock a room right away, and then you also get a 3/1 flyer right away. It's not always going to line up like that. If it did, it would be much higher on this list, but it's going to do that sometimes, and no matter what, it's going to get you something back from your graveyard because you're going to have an enchantment to get back. And then, if you untap and play that on your next turn, you get that flyer in the end anyway. At number 7, I have Waltz of Rage. This sorcery has a ceiling where it destroys everything on the battlefield except your best creature, and you also get a bunch of cards back for every one of your creatures that died. That's a pretty insane one-sided wrath. And if it really did just say destroy all creatures but your best one and draw a bunch of cards, then it would be much, much higher on this list. But it's a little more finicky than that. You have to target a creature you control, and it does damage equal to its power to each other creature. So if you don't have a big enough creature in play, you may not be able to wipe the board. So that ceiling is obtainable because you also get to exile the top card of your library for each creature you control that dies that turn, and you can play it until the end of your next turn. So you do get way more benefits out of this wrath-like effect than your opponent will ever get out of it, since you get to decide what creature does the damage, that creature doesn't get damaged at all, and then you get cards for all the creatures that do die. Your opponent doesn't get any of that stuff. But the setup is pretty real, although there are Death Touch creatures in the format that can make this particularly absurd. Again, it does have this floor where you don't have a big enough creature, and that does keep it lower on the list than it would otherwise be. But I think most of the time, you're going to cast Waltz of Rage, you're going to create a one-sided wrath effect, and you're going to win the game. At number 6, I have Unholy Annex and Ritual Chamber. So this is one of the enchantment rooms in the set, and it's a bit different than most of them. For most of them, you really want to cast the cheaper side earlier in the game, and the other side later in the game. That's not really the case here, because in today's limited formats, if you tap out to play Unholy Annex on turn 3, there's a pretty good chance you're going to get run over, and then losing 2 life to draw a card is going to be kind of brutal. So generally, you'd much rather play a 3-drop on turn 3, and then a 4-drop on turn 4, and then you play Ritual Chamber on 5, and that means you get a 5-mana 6/6 Black Demon creature token with flying. That's a great rate, especially because on your next turn you can unlock Unholy Annex, which suddenly not only draws you a card, but drains your opponent 2 life every time it triggers. It's pretty hard to be upset with what you get out of the mana investment here. Even if your opponent does get rid of the demon token, you do still have this draw effect, which can help you win the game. So this is a card that can take over the game in more ways than one, both because you get a big flying demon and because you eventually start drawing extra cards. At number 5, I have Nico, Light of Hope. This is a 4-mana 3/4 that creates 2 shard tokens. These are enchantment tokens, and you can pay 2 generic to sacrifice them, scry 1, and draw a card. Even if Nico didn't have any other text on it, this would be an amazing card in this set, because it's effectively a 3-for-1, but the format also has the Eerie mechanic, which will trigger twice when you make these shard tokens, so you're likely to get even more value, especially because blue-white is one of the enchantment-heavy decks in the format. And then Nico has this other ability for good measure, where you pay 2 generic and tap Nico to exile a non-legendary creature you control, and then you can have those shards become copies of those creatures until the beginning of the next end step. Nico's going to take over the game almost no matter what direction you go in with Nico. At number 4, it's Valgavoth's Onslaught. So the floor on this card is that you pay 1 for X, and that means you manifest Dread once and put 1+1/+1 counter on each of those creatures. So the floor here is a 3-mana 3/3 with all the upside Manifest Dread gives you. That's obviously not a bomb, but that is the worst thing this card does, and it scales from there. If you pay 2 for X, you get 2 4/4s for 5 total mana. That's probably the sweet spot where it's going to be the hardest for your opponent to overcome that value, but then it scales from there, and you just keep getting more and more Manifest Dread creatures face down, and they get bigger and bigger and bigger. This card reminds me a lot of Doppelgang, a card we saw that also had X associated with its cost, and it wasn't like completely broken when you spent 1 mana on Doppelgang, but that was the floor where you just make a copy of 1 permanent, and things get even sillier from there. This has this reasonable floor and an absolutely insane ceiling. At number 3, I have the Wandering Rescuer. So even if she didn't have Convoke, she'd be a 5-mana 3/4 with double strike and flash. That probably wouldn't quite be a bomb, but that's a creature that you can flash into play and ambush block almost anything and she'll survive. So you're already talking about a 2-for-1 there, but things get way more interesting because of the fact that she has Convoke and she gives your other tapped creatures hexproof. This means you can also flash her in as a way to protect your creatures from removal by tapping your creatures. Tapping creatures, like we saw with Tyvar earlier, also has a bunch of extra value in the format because of the survival mechanic. And then you still have this huge creature that's a threat on virtually any board in play. At number 2, I have the Roller Crusher Ride. Even without Delirium, you could pay 3 for X here, so 6 total mana, and do 3 damage to 3 creatures. Now, you do have to get to 6 total mana to get to the point where the Roller Crusher Ride starts to feel pretty good, but that is already very, very good. I mean, that's going to allow you to kill 3 creatures almost always. But the Roller Crusher Ride also has Delirium, and when you have Delirium, it and all of your other sources of non-combat damage do double the damage instead. So now you're paying 3 for X and doing 6 to 3 things, which that is absolutely going to kill everything. It also makes it more efficient if you spend less mana on it too, of course. Basically, the Roller Crusher Ride is going to be a really powerful 3-for-1, even if you don't have Delirium, and if you do, it's going to be even more insane, and it even augments your other non-combat damage once it's in play. You're just going to win the game most of the time when you cash the Roller Crusher Ride. Before we look at the number 1 card on the list, here are the cards that got bomb grades in my set review but didn't make the list. Alright, and at number 1, I've actually got 3 cards, so I cheated a little bit, and it's the 3 Overlords who all received an A or higher in the set review. You also saw the Black Overlord on the honorable mentions. The green one, not a bomb, But these three are definitely bombs. I think the best of them is Overlord of the Mistmoors. You know, if you just impend it, you paid 4 mana for 2 2/1 flyers. That would be a card you play 100% of the time, and it's probably one of the best cards in your deck. That's if the card ended there. But on top of that, it eventually gets to be a full-on creature. It can attack and get the trigger again. And if you draw it late, you can just cast it and get everything all at once. No matter what you do with it, you're going to get a ton of value out of it, and more than your mana's worth of value. It's an incredibly powerful card that will easily take over any game, and I think it's the biggest bomb in the entire set. But the blue and red Overlords don't trail too far behind it. I think the red one is the next best one. It does 4 damage to any target when it enters, and that means when you pay the impending cost of 2 generic and 2 red, it'll do that right away, and then it can do it again when it attacks. Overlord of the Flood Pits, I think, is the third best of the Overlords. It doesn't add to the board, and it's also kind of awkward if you impend it compared to the others, because drawing 2 and discarding a card for 3 mana is a lot less good than what you get from the white and the red Overlords. But it's also kind of the most efficient of them if you just hard cast it. You pay 5 and you get a 5/3 flyer, you draw 2 and you discard a card. Like, that is a ton of value. That's a 2-for-1 right there. So all 3 of these can take over games. Even if they never ever attack, they're going to have massive impacts on games. And if they do attack even once, in most cases, the game's just going to be over. So those are my picks for the 10 biggest bombs in Duskmourn. If you want to own any of these cards, because most of them are going to be good in 60-card formats in Commander too, check out the description where you can find a direct Card Kingdom link for each card that appeared in the video. If you want to make sure you catch future videos, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. And if you want to check out my set review for this format, you should see a playlist on your screen shortly. Thanks for watching.